Hey students, I'm making this video just for a review. The objective is to prepare for assessment number 4, which is on genetics. So in this review, we're mostly going to just cover some vocabulary and Punnett squares. We'll do an example. And the words that you should know are trait, gene, allele, dominant and recessive, genotype, heterozygous, homozygous, and phenotype. So make sure you write those down. If you need to pause the video, you can. So a trait is a specific characteristic, such as curly hair, straight hair, tall or short, what color your eyes are. All of those are traits that both people and animals have traits. Plants have traits too. All right, a gene is a sequence of DNA that determines traits. And I put a picture on here. If you'll remember, a DNA is a long, long chain of genetic material. And a gene, each gene is just a piece of that DNA. So each gene will give a person a certain trait, and those genes are located on the DNA. That's kind of important to remember when we talk later about karyotypes, that some things you can tell by looking at the DNA in a karyotype, but if it's something on the DNA, like a gene, that may not show up for genetic abnormalities. Okay, so let's move on. An allele is a different form of the gene. So alleles come in pairs because you get one from your dad and one from your mom, and there may be multiple pairs of alleles for a given trait. So you need to remember that the dominant gene is the gene that you will see. So we'll be talking about freckles in a minute. Freckles are dominant, so if you have a allele for dominant, you'll have freckles, even if you also have a recessive one. We write that with a capital letter. The recessive allele will only be expressed if there's no dominant genes present in the pair. So it's represented by a lowercase letter. Genotype is the genetic sequence represented by 2 letters. And I remember this because geno starts the same as genetic. And there are 2 kinds of genotypes, heterozygous and homozygous. So if we look at this example, big T, little t, we would say big T stands for tall, little t stands for short. And if this was what I inherited, this heterozygous allele, I would actually be tall. So that's phenotype. We'll talk about that next. But that is, remember, hetero means different. So 2 different traits are inherited. Homozygous, homo means same. So if you get traits with 2 alleles that are both for tall, that would be capital T, capital T. That person's going to be tall. The little t is also homozygous. So it just means that both of the letters represented will be the same, either both tall or both short if it's homozygous. If it's heterozygous, they will be different, one tall, one short. All right, and the phenotype is the physical characteristic that is observable. So in the last slide, we said capital T for tall, little t for short. If I'm short, that's the phenotype, but my genotype would be little t, little t. Okay, so we are going to look at Punnett squares. And we have some steps in our problems that we're working. First, we would define the letters. Then we would define the cross. In other words, what parents, letters the parents have, then complete the square, find the genotype ratio and the phenotype ratio. We're going to talk about freckles for our example. And when we choose the letters for freckles, I'm going to use a capital F for freckles because freckles are dominant. And I'm going to use a little f for the genotype of no freckles. So if we're looking at the possibilities of genotypes, there's three possibilities. Either you can have a pair of capital Fs, a pair of lowercase f's, or you can have a capital and a lowercase f. So that capital and lowercase, that is heterozygous. Two capital F's is homozygous dominant. Two little f's are homozygous recessive. The phenotype is what that looks like in a person. So for my example of two capital F's, that person's going to have freckles because freckles are dominant. In my genotype capital F, little f, they're also going to have freckles because anytime there's a capital F, that dominant trait is going to show. That person's going to have freckles. If we have a little f, we're not going to see any freckles because we don't have a dominant trait, and the recessive of no freckles is what's going to appear. All right, now we're going to put this in our chart. So first of all, step one is just choosing. I'm going to use F, big F for freckles, little f for no freckles. And in this example, the male is heterozygous, so I chose big F, little f. Remember, heterozygous means one of each. And it also says the female is heterozygous. So we have a big F and a little f, also for the female. So now it says complete the complete the square. We'll do that together. I'm going to put the dad on the top with his big F and little f. I'm going to put the mom on the side with her big F and little f. Okay, then I will bring down the father's big F and his little f. Now I'm going to bring the mother's across. I'm going to take her big F across, and I'm going to take her little f across. We put the big F always first because it's dominant. And that's how you complete the square, by just moving those down their rows and columns. And then it asks for what genotypes we have in our next generation. And what we're going to do is just read them right off this chart. There's 4 possibilities. You have a 1 in 4 possibility of getting the genotype capital F, capital F. You have a 2 in 4 possibility of getting the genotype capital F, little f, and 1 in 4 chance of getting the genotype little f, little f. All right, so those are the genotypes, and that's not lining up, but that's okay. The phenotype means how many are actually going to have freckles or not have freckles. So if I look at that, I have 3 out of 4 have 1 F in there. I have the 1 that's 2 capital F's, and the 1 that's 2 that are heterozygous. So my chances are 3 out of 4. And I can write it like that, 3 out of 4. Or I could say that is 75% chance of having a child with freckles. Interestingly, these parents have freckles, but they still have a 1 in 4% chance, or 25% chance of having a child with no freckles, because they each had recessive trait. All right, that's about it for this video. If you want more practice, you can go to khanacademy.org and search for Punnett Squares, and you can do some of these squares yourself to get ready for the test. So make sure you know your vocabulary, you know how to work these Punnett Squares, find the ratios, and you're going to just do great on that assessment that's coming up. Have a great day.